Hey, folks, you probably thought Corey and I ran off and joined the circus. We're a little bit late with this podcast, and we apologize. We appreciate your patience, and those of you who have emailed us and said, "Hey, where was the most recent podcast?"
Here it is.
They're about ready to get it.
That's right.
With that, we're going to jump into this, and Corey's going to be just a fountain of knowledge today. So thanks for being here.
Welcome to the Elk Talk Podcast with Randy Newberg and Corey Jacobson, presented by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation.
The goal is what little you and I know about elk hunting, we share with people.
I've got an elk building. It's like 120 yards away. What do I do? First off, the thought would never cross my mind when an elk's being 120 yards away to call anybody on a cell phone.
All elk?
All the time? Only elk?
Only elk.
Well, it's us having conversations, so we usually go down some rabbit holes, but
if you hunt with Corey Jacobson, you will find the landscape is full of rabbit holes. We're just going to make this up as we go.
And you look at it like, oh, that's a target-rich environment. But if you're trying to single one out, a solo target there is much easier to go into than a big group.
We record everything, so there's no BSing, no lying, no faking it with us.
Did we hit the record button?
I forgot to hit the record button. If you want to know something about elk hunting, this probably isn't the podcast to listen to. Should we give them a list of all the other podcasts where they might learn something? The Elk Talk Podcast is brought to you by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, ensuring the future of elk, other wildlife, their habitat, and our hunting heritage. To become a member, go to rmef.org.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Mountain Ops, making outdoor energy and performance nutrition to make you a stronger and healthier elk hunter. They have a full line of hunting-related supplements, including meal replacement shakes, multivitamins, pre-workout fuel, and post-workout recovery. And my favorite, their new performance protein bars that, by the way, are packed with 270 calories and 20 grams of protein, but contain less than 6 grams of sugar. Visit mountainops.com to learn more and to order, and be sure to use the promo code ELKTALK to save on your next order.
The podcast is also brought to you by Gerber. Go to gerbergear.com and learn about the knives, the Vital, the Big Game Vital, the Gator Premium, all the things that we use when we're out in the woods, and not just knives, but also some really cool multi-tools that they have.
And we have a promo code for Gerber as well. Just use the code ELKTALK to save 20% on your orders at gerbergear.com. And we are also brought to you by Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls. And Rocky Mountain Hunting Calls is the original designer and inventor of the pallet plate diaphragm that's completely changed the way elk calls are made and used. And to find out more and to order your elk calls, go to RockyMountainHuntingCalls.com or BuglingBull.com and use promo code ELKTALK, and you're going to save 15% on all of your elk calls and elk call accessories.
The Elk Talk Podcast is also brought to you by Go Hunt Maps. We've been using Go Hunt Maps since they started, providing them with our feedback and our ideas to add to their maps and their tools. So if you go to gohunt.com and sign up for their Explorer maps, you'll get all 50 states for the low price of $49. And by using promo code ELKTALK, they're going to give you $20 of credit in their gear shop that you can apply towards things you might want for this upcoming hunting season. GoHunt.com, Explorer Maps, promo code ELKTALK.
Lastly, the University of Elk Hunting online course is a proud partner of the Elk Talk Podcast. And within the University of Elk Hunting online course, you're going to find nearly 60 chapters organized in 17 modules of elk hunting instruction aimed at making you a more successful elk hunter. From planning and e-scouting to calling strategies and packing, every imaginable elk hunting topic is included in the online course. And regardless of your previous elk hunting experience or success, I'm confident the University of Elk Hunting online course will make you a more confident, more successful elk hunter. Just visit elk101.com and use the promo code ELKTALK to save 20% when you sign up for a membership to the University of Elk Hunting online course.
And with that, Corey, we are ready to get into it.
Let's jump into it.
Hey, Corey. You know, it's not very often we get to do this face to face.
No kidding. It'll be like a real conversation again.
Corey Jacobson found it in his powers to end up in Bozeman, Montana on a hot August weekend.
Man, it has been warm, but it's also been stormy.
I know. I like that. It's been raining every evening.
Yeah. Speaking of, did you see the hailstorm that went through Wallowa, Oregon, day before yesterday?
No.
I got to show you pictures here because
Really?
I just saw a friend of mine, Nick, over there, posted pictures and just said it was a rough day for everybody over here.
Ugh.
And you got to see.
Oh my gosh.
We're not talking just hail damage to the hood. We're talking windshields, not just
imploded.
broken, but
Holy
imploded,
smoke.
sheds completely flattened.
That's up in Northeast Oregon.
Yeah, up in Wallowa. I mean, animals outside were
Dead
killed.
chickens.
Dead chickens laying there. There's a picture of the hail. There's 3 of them about the size of golf balls.
Gosh.
But it gets better than that.
How would you like to be an elk standing out there? Oh, look at that thing. That thing is the size of a softball.
Yeah, I was going to say it's bigger than a baseball. That was falling from the sky and hitting. I mean, it destroyed roofs. It destroyed every windshield, every car that was outside. They said the town is basically destroyed.
Oh, look at all this. That guy's siding and roof.
Yep.
Well, what was siding and what was a roof and what was a windshield in a car?
I mean, we're talking the side of cars, not just the
that
hood.
looks like something over in the Ukraine that you see right
Exactly.
now.
So,
Holy smokes.
yeah, I guess they classified it a tornado and hailstorm.
It certainly looks like the hailstorm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we'll handle a lightning storm and a little bit of wind for an hour in the evenings, I guess.
Man, we don't need any of that. I wonder what that does, though, to like a young elk. If a young elk got drilled in the noggin by a baseball-sized chunk of ice that just fell
Free falling at terminal velocity.
Yeah. Wonder what the terminal velocity would be. It's probably measured in miles per hour, not feet per second.
I guarantee, yeah.
Dang. Huh.
Well, so
anyhow, welcome to Bozeman.
Thank you. No, I was really surprised. I kept a watch as we were flying in. I was looking out the airplane window. I didn't see a single 400-inch bull.
Really? You just weren't looking close enough. They're everywhere.
I looked behind every tree I could see, and I didn't even see one.
Yeah, I was down this morning. I was one of the moderators at the Montana Elk Symposium that's being held in Bozeman today. And if I would have asked for a show of hands of who's going to see a 400-inch bull elk this year, probably half people would have raised their hand. I don't know why you guys struggle to see 400-inch bull elk with regularity. I mean, it just... All you gotta do is come to Bozeman, get yourself like 4 or 5 stickers on the back of your truck.
You have to have a topper on the back of your truck, right? To put the stickers on.
Well, it helps because then you can side panel them. You know, you can look like the 24 car on NASCAR or something, and then it really helps if you have like one of those funky rod box lockers on the top.
Yep.
I mean, that helps. That you'll see more 400-inch bull elk if you're like that way.
Interesting.
And if you have a man bun and you shoot a 6.5 Creedmoor, you probably pass multiple 400-inch bull elk.
I think you just offended a handful of people right there. We didn't just offend Bozeman residents. We offended a lot of people in a lot of places with that. You went too far, Randy.
I know I did, but here's the reason I should pull it up. There's a meme out there about the Bozeman elk hunter.
Oh, really?
And that's where I was walking through all the features of that meme, and something at the bottom it says something like 6.5 cm, and it's like, and the guy had all kinds of. I mean, he had everything. The way they dressed him up, it's like, that
looks like people I've seen around here.
But anyhow, folks, if you don't have a sense of humor, you're listening to the wrong thing. Because
no offense intended.
We make plenty of fun of and humor of ourselves. And if you think we do on this podcast, you should see us when we're out hunting together.
We make fun of each other then. Well, I make fun of you. You're kind enough not to make fun of me back. And there's a point where I feel bad sometimes.
No,
but
don't. I deserve every bit of it. You know, the downside is this is the year I'm going to kill multiple elk, even though I only have 2 elk tags. Here's why. It's the worst grouse crop ever.
So you're actually going to be focused on elk.
I'm actually going to be looking for elk.
Forced to focus.
Yeah. It's the shiny objects. There are no more.
I'll tell you right now, though, I have seen more grouse in the last 4 weeks than I've ever seen in the summer. But with that being said, I've not seen a single young one. They've all been
adult
singles.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you're like me and you're going to try to shoot them with an arrow,
you need the dumb ones.
You need those dumb young ones that are just plump and fat and just
haven't been through a season yet.
So tender. They're just like juice oozing off them as quick as you peel the breast off.
Man,
it's like
that does sound good.
It is.
Yeah.
But anyhow, what elk problems we going to solve today?
I'm not sure. You said you were at the Montana Elk Symposium?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That sounds like official.
It was pretty official. I mean, I don't know how many people are there. It's a lot. They've been planning it for a long time. There's this group called the Montana Citizens Elk Coalition, and they're trying to head off some of this craziness that we get in our legislature. I've come to the conclusion that if we don't start solving some of these problems amongst ourselves as groups, as landowners and hunters and outfitters and everybody, the legislature steps in. And they're like, okay, yeah, I guess there's a problem. Here's my solution, and it gets passed.
They hear one problem from one constituent, and they come up with one solution based on their limited experience, and that's what goes through.
Yeah, and none of those are ever sustainable in the long term because usually it's so slanted that the next turnover in a legislature or in an administration, some other constituent gets somebody's ear. And so we did on the morning panel that I was moderating, we did have a legislator there. He's a super good guy, fanatic elk hunter. So we solved a lot of the world's problems, I'll tell you that.
So I guess, and I'd never thought about that. I was going to ask if there was anyone from the legislature there. Mm-hmm. If you have someone who is a passionate elk hunter who understands a lot of these dynamics, and another legislator comes in and introduces something, will they stand up for, is it typical for them to educate the rest of them?
Yeah.
Because I know in Idaho this last year with the mechanicals and the lighted knocks, I didn't feel like there was anybody in our legislature that understood the issue or understood what was going on. So it went through unanimously.
Yeah. And what your hope is, and that is, because a lot of times these things are introduced by people who don't hunt, or they're not, their scope of the problem is limited by the fact that, well, I go out and, out on the family farm and I shoot a whitetail doe, and that's the extent of their hunting. And nothing wrong with that. It's just what their life experience is. So I've been lucky that over years of being involved, I know which of those legislators hunt like you and I would. So regardless of what side of the aisle it's on, I can, try to communicate and say, hey, I know you don't want to do this and call them out in front of everybody. So before we get to the committee hearing or whatever, do you think you could share this perspective with that person? And sometimes you can head off some really bad stuff that way. Or sometimes you'll get wind that something's coming up. And there's a couple really good hardcore hunters on both sides here in Montana. And I can pick up the phone. In fact, 2 of them were in the audience this morning. And I can be like, hey, I hear this is coming. 1, hopefully you can kill it. Or 2, can we tweak it this way or that way? And I'm not the only one who has some of those people on who have access to them. There's other great groups in the state that also have access. So we are lucky in Montana from the standpoint of how many, maybe not how many, but what percentage of our legislators hunt.
Yeah.
I don't know what that percentage is, and I certainly don't know what it would be in other states, but I suspect that it's pretty high in Montana.
That's cool.
So, But we still end up with some really
questionable ideas coming through.
Yeah, and when we get them, almost every time the bill is not sponsored or introduced by one of these folks who are serious hunters, it's some guy, like you said, he's she or whatever is in some profession where they just would never hunt.
Yep.
And so somebody down at the coffee shop or the barber shop or the grocery store is like,
there's hunters in every district in the state. So they have to go to one person who's representing them. And
so the other thing that I think this is a really good process is if you want to play offense, you don't wait until the legislative session starts. If that's all defense once the legislature starts. So our session will start in 5 months. So trying to get ahead of that a little bit and say, hey, here are some ideas that all groups are in support of. Let's think about that. Or give the department this latitude, because right now, things have changed the last 20 years. The department is locked into this narrow kind of toolkit. Give them this tool or that tool. And so the other thing I have found with wildlife things is if you can get landowner and hunters together to agree on something, you don't have to agree on anything, but there's some of those things that you can say, hey, we're all in favor of that. Whew, that's going through just about 100 to 0.
Yep.
So, but that doesn't allow anybody to directly call in or kill an elk, Corey. So we're going to have to get to some of these questions because you've been teaching elk hunting for the last 10 days, just about between updating your course.
Yeah.
And then you've been out here with Peaks doing their seminar. I'm glad that they got you the first part of that course.
Well, I'm glad I got it done with.
Because they get me tomorrow morning for 3 hours. I hope they brought a lot of caffeine.
Oh, the morning is good. Mark's up right now. He's doing some e-scouting stuff, Mark Livesay. And I feel sorry for him. We had Birch Barrel cooked us lunch, and it was a big old elk burger with cheese and bacon, and everybody ate it, and you could just see their eyes gloss over and the heat coming through the window. And I told him right before I left, I'm like, Mark, if you keep these guys all awake, you have been a smashing success today.
Well, he follows me tomorrow, so that's Mark. He has a platform called Tree Line Pursuits. I'm glad I'm doing the morning
Exactly.
session.
Yeah, morning's good.
But
no, it was
were there
awesome.
any real compelling questions that popped up? Because I know you do a Q&A session there.
Yeah, and I really tried to keep it very open. I talked on 4 topics. It was how to use elk calls, and talked about setting up on elk, and then calling elk in, and then common scenarios or challenges that you face with calling elk. So it was really heavily calling centered. There were only 12 seats available. Like you'd mentioned, Peaks only opened 12 seats up. So there's only, and one of the people who signed up ended up getting COVID. So there's only 11 of the members there. So it really gave me, I went around one-on-one for about an hour just working on elk calling, just to get them all up to speed and make sure that they were improved. And you can't do that, through podcast or seminars. Right. So being in a room and being able to just hands-on, everybody had their calls. Everybody was working on that. It was a lot of fun and a really cool atmosphere, a great group of guys who were obviously, there was one gentleman there from Calgary outside of Calgary, Alberta, Canada, Alabama, Georgia, Kansas, there are a couple closer Idaho, Montana guys, but somebody takes 3-4 days and sacrifices and comes out from Alabama to Montana to spend a couple days learning about elk. They're serious. Yeah. That's the kind of sacrifice that will provide results. So really fun group of guys to be able to talk elk hunting with, and had some great questions. That's why I tried telling them, listen, I've been doing this 35 years and I still mess up every single day I elk hunt. So don't think that there is a bad question or a beginner question to ask. Ask if you have a question. And they did.
That's where I guess it's maybe it's just the nature of people's expectations and what we do, but when I tell people I invent new ways to mess up an encounter, they seem to think I'm just kidding.
Yeah. What is it, your aggressive arrogance or your passive arrogance?
Passive arrogance. And I am 100% honest when I say that. I know this year I have my Montana elk tag that I'm going to hunt archery, and then I probably will mess up enough things there. I'll have to come back and try it in rifle in November. And I have my Wyoming general elk tag. There is going to be multiple days where I screw it up so bad because I don't even see an elk. It's like, how could I have been this dumb? Randy, think about this. You know, I was hunting too high or too low or who knows what, or I thought I could cheat a thermal, right? This is my great... So I hear a bugle over there, and the sun is kind of just starting to crank over on this slope I'm on. So there's an uphill thermal. The bull's across the basin, and that's still a little bit shaded where he is. And somehow I think I can cheat these thermals where you got one going up and one going down, but when they get to the back, they kind of swirl. And I'm like, oh, I'm just going to sneak. I only have like 30 yards, and he's 200 yards away. I don't know how many times I have.
I'm just going to try it and see if it'll work out. Yeah, that's...
So those are, when I say I invent new ways, that's what I'm talking about. Or I heard a bugle, and then I heard it getting a little closer, and I didn't anticipate that he's still coming. So I focused on where the last bugle was that I heard, and that's what I set up for as I'm moving in. Well, guess what? He knew I was somewhere around, so he moved downwind of me, and I'm hunting
still moving in the straight line.
Yeah. And all of a sudden you're you just look at the camera and you're like, oh, guys, don't record this. This is
we talk about Murphy's Law, and it's like, at some point it's just our own ignorance. It has nothing to do with Murphy.
Yeah. But I think the problem for me, I make more mistakes archery elk hunting, and part of that is just the distance thing. If he's bugling over there at 250 yards and I got my 300 with me, there's usually a shot fired. And I think it's that. I also think it's the excitement factor. Because as excited as I get if I see a bull out there at 200 yards, I'm not shaking and rattling and my teeth chattering like when I can see him over there just on the other side of some, lodgepole or something, just tearing something apart, and he's 18 yards away, and I can feel him, like the vibration. So I think that contributes to my messed up thought process.
And since we started using, lapel mics and everything, it's so fun because you can hear people's heartbeat. I mean, you can hear physical heartbeat on the lapel mic, and it's so fun as that bull gets to 100 yards and then closes to 60. It's boom, 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 and then it gets to 30 and it's boom, 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 boom. You can see it and you can feel it, and it's real. That's what somebody asked. How do you control that? And I'm like, I don't know, and I don't ever want to know. I never want to control. I mean, yes, you want to be under control, but man, if that excitement ever goes away. I've never called in an elk where my heart rate didn't escalate. Yeah. And I hope I never do.
I've never had an encounter. In fact, when I get a response, I can instantly feel like, oh, man.
We just went to a new level.
Yeah. And then as you get closer and closer. But the questions people ask, or some of the questions we got here, a lot of it is about the setups. I heard the bull, I've got a response. How much do I call?
Yeah. A lot of scenario stuff coming in right now. I think people are remembering last season, and when 9 out of 10 of the hunters that are out there are remembering nothing but failure from last season, it stings a little. And so we're getting a lot of questions, and that was, I think the most thought out questions today at the elk camp with Peaks was scenario based. I had a group of elk out in an open field in front of me, and I thought if I can make it up to that little dip in the depression in the landscape, I can get in there and call. and didn't realize that when I called, the elk was going to turn around and not be able to see anything. And it's in a wide open field, and that just wouldn't be right. And so he rounded up his cows and left. What should have I done?
Yeah.
And, in that case, it's always let them go. You aren't pressuring them. They aren't leaving because of you at that point. Let them get across the field into the timber. Then you slip around the edge of the timber, and now you can go and make a play. But when you slip out in the middle of an open field and bugle at them and they turn around, yeah, you might get lucky 1 out of 20 times, and that bull might turn and come across the open field thinking, wow, I should be able to see something. I wonder why I can't see him. But 95% of the time, they're thinking, I should be able to see something and I don't, so that probably means danger, let's leave. And so there's nothing wrong with just, being a little patient, let them do their thing in that open field, and eventually they're going to leave it, and that's when you go and move in. Yeah,
make sure that the setup is in your favor, not in their favor.
I have a bolded quote in the University of Elk Hunting online course that says, it will do you no good to call in a bull in a bad setup.
Ooh, that should be a bumper sticker.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
that should be a tag that you put right on the inside of the riser on your bow, right at eye level.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of bumper stickers, we ought to just sell...
limb stickers.
Yeah, limb stickers.
Ooh, we're on to something here.
There you go.
Limb stickers. That's like a pot sticker.
Or like a pot liquor.
Limb sticker, pot liquor, pot sticker.
No, that's really good advice, and that probably answers 3 or 4 of the questions that came in of, well, what do I do? Because I knew I'd been chasing this bull and I finally caught up. Well, a lot of times the reason you catch up, per se, quote unquote, is because the bull knows they're now in the place that
he's got all the advantages.
And I tell people, if you think that this bull elk that lived 5, 6, 8 years on this landscape doesn't know the wind current in every little nook and cranny of his territory, you're kidding yourself.
Yep.
And
he knows where every vantage point visually is. He knows where he needs to get to if there's something behind him where he can watch. I mean, he knows that, and he goes there on purpose.
Yeah, he's not an occasional visitor there like we are. Yeah. He lives there. He's dodging grizzly bears and mountain lions and who knows what else. And this is how he stays alive, is by paying attention to, if I go stand over here, there's little drainage that carries the scent up there. And so if those guys come across...
If they cross anywhere below me here, that scent's going to funnel right here. So I'm going to stand right here.
Yeah. And then Randy Newberg, walks across there, and all of a sudden you hear... Boom, 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 boom. And then you hear me say a few colorful words, turn the camera. Well,
did this last week. Why did I do it again?
So I guess the point of that is... like you said, it doesn't do any good to call in an elk where the setup sucks, where they have all the advantage.
Yeah, and there are a few things I think that make a setup maybe not perfect, but more ideal, and that elk has to feel comfortable coming in. He's not going to come into a setup if he's uncomfortable, and the things that make him uncomfortable are, I'm not going to be able to see when I go in there, I'm not going to be able to hear when I go in there, or I'm not going to be able to smell when I go in there. If they can't use their senses to protect themselves, they're not going to feel comfortable. So the goal is to make that elk feel comfortable. Make him feel like he's able to use his senses when he comes in. And when you have a caller and a shooter separated, it's a lot easier to do that.
Right.
Because then the caller's back there saying, okay, I'm going to do all I need to do to make that bull come in feeling comfortable because he thinks I'm the only potential threat in the area. So you have to remember, when an elk's coming into a bugle, he's still thinking there may be danger between me and that bugle. Mm-hmm. And so I'm going to make sure before I go approaching that bugle that I've got a good visual, or I can see really good or smell really good. And if he can't, he's going to stop right there. And he's not going to take a chance. The elk aren't like us. It's like, I wonder, maybe I can make this happen. Maybe I can beat the thermals just this once. Elk don't do that. They're like, if there's any chance that I can't beat the thermals, I'm not moving because I'm safe right here. And so setting up, with that shooter out in front, what that does is you become an invisible player out in front. And then it's just a competition, a contest between the caller and the elk. And when that caller can make the elk come toward him feeling like he's protected, then the shooter just needs to make sure that he's in a place where he can take advantage of that elk coming in feeling comfortable.
Yeah. That seems so common sense, but in the heat of the moment, it's, I mean, you think about all the information you're trying to process at that time, you know, the wind, the sun angle, the attitude you think the bull has,
you're out of breath. You've got you're oxygen deprived in your brain. You're trying to throw a bugle out there.
Yeah.
All these things at once.
And I wish I could get across this little opening to the other side, but he's on his way in and he might catch me in the middle of it. So, okay, I'll set up on this side and hope he's dumb enough to come across.
It's not ideal.
Yeah. Yeah, so many times. And it's so much different rifle hunting. Like in Colorado 2 years ago, same exact setup you're talking about. There's a bull on a timbered ridge just snorting. And it's the first rifle season. And so I turned to the camera. I'm like, I would never do this in archery season because there's no way this bull will come across this opening. But I happen to have a 300 Win mag in my hand, and it's only 120 yards across this opening. So I start
all he has to do is show himself once. He doesn't have to come into us. He just needs to be visible.
But as an example, he would stick his head out from behind some trees and he'd look, where's this cow I hear? And he turns and he doesn't see a cow. He just quietly turns and walks. And as I see him walking away, what do? I don't give him no. All of a sudden he turns and he's like, where is that thing? And again, he sticks his head just out of the trees enough to check it out. Yep. And, well, the second time he did that, it was bad news. But he was a really broken up 5x5. But he was 6 years old when I got his teeth aged. So he'd been around a time or two. And he was really cagey. He wasn't like a raghorn that's like, oh boy. And
come running in, cloppity clop, cloppity clop.
Like a reindeer or something. And so I'd made that mistake so many times archery hunting. And then even after I shot him, we heard him fall, or we thought we heard him fall. I turned to the camera again and said, don't ever do this in archery season. don't think this is an archery tactic because it's not. The
goal's different. I mean, and it really is. And that's when you set up, you have to think about the end goal at the beginning of the setup. The end goal.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you're setting up to call in an elk, the end goal isn't to shoot the elk. The end goal, I mean, yes, that ultimately is, but the goal you're trying to do is to get that elk into a shooting lane. Mm-hmm. And so when you set up, that needs to be what you're thinking about. You can't just set up and put an arrow on and be, I got to shoot this elk.
Right.
There's a lot of things that are required to get that elk into the shooting lane that ultimately allows you to shoot that elk. So it's important, I think, when you're setting up to think about that aspect of it. What do I need to do to get that elk into a place where I can get a shot? When you're doing that, you look around, okay, I could shoot an elk if he's there, I could shoot an elk if he's there, I can shoot an elk if he's there. Are those realistic places for that elk to come to? Does he have to come through a great big alder thicket to get to right there? If he does, he's not going to do it.
Right.
Is there a big game trail that's going to bring him right there to that shooting lane at 35 yards, and it gives me 10 yards, a place where there's a tree, he's going to walk behind that, I'm going to draw my bow. I mean, you can almost visualize each of these situations, and when you set up in that manner, in fact, I told the people this morning at the elk camp, it's okay for the caller to go up to the shooter's location before he backs up. That way he knows what's there.
Yeah.
The caller can see, okay, here's where I need to get the bull. Here's where he's probably going to come through. And then you drop back 40 or 50 yards on the backside of the hill and pull him back through there. So keeping that in mind when you're setting up that, hey, the goal isn't to kill an elk here. The goal is to get the elk in a shooting lane, which will result in a good shot and a kill. So, I mean, it is the goal, but you need to think a little more detailed than that.
Huh. See, I'm this is like confession. Too often I get excited and I'm just like plop down right here because, oh man, he's on his way in.
Yep.
And if I took 2 extra seconds, I probably would have got myself in a spot that gave me more options.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I can screw it up with the best of them. But some of the other questions that we've got recently have been about, I hunt solo. So therefore, a lot of times I don't even call.
Yeah.
And I get that, but then some of them are like, what do I do when I'm all by myself? Because it seems like when they come in, they're facing right at me. They know exactly where I was at.
And they do, and that's the hard part is, when you're hunting by yourself, you are the caller and the shooter. When you have two people and you have a caller and a shooter, you have two separate entities there that are able to physically separate. And that's almost a requirement to be able to kill an elk. You have to have a caller and a shooter geographically in different locations. And so when you're hunting by yourself, you have to figure out a way to at least give the appearance that there's a separation between the caller and the shooter. And, your setup is even more critical. One of the things I think that most elk hunters struggle with is when an elk gets to 80 or 100 yards and stops.
Yep.
And they're like, that hang up, the hang up, he hung up at 80 yards, he hung up at 100 yards. If I could just get him that last 40 yards, well, there's a reason he hangs up there. And it's usually because the bull gets to a point where he can see the location the calls are coming from, but he can't see the source of the calls. And you don't want him to see the source of the calls because that's a human sitting there. But if he sees that tree and he's like, the noise is coming from behind that tree, I should be able to see an elk, and I don't. I'm not taking a step closer until I get visual confirmation. That's a problem. So when you're a caller setting up for a separate shooter, you can kind of eliminate that just by picking the calling location and getting back so that bull has to get to a certain point. He's in a shooting lane at that point before he can see that location. When you're by yourself, that's hard to do. So really, there's only two things that you can do to create the illusion of that separation. The first thing is you call as the caller, and then you physically move ahead to a shooting location. So you call from a tree, you move ahead 30 yards, and you wait there, and that elk's coming by looking for the source 30 yards behind you. And that can work. Moving ahead on an elk when you're in, because we're talking usually inside 100, 150 yards, you want to move ahead 30 yards to create some separation, and that's risky.
Yeah.
You're going to, a lot of times, get spotted. So the other thing you have to do is you have to broadcast your calls like a ventriloquist. You have to send your calls to a location.
Like howdy doody.
Okay. Is howdy doody a ventriloquist?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, howdy doody was the little wooden doll over there. And the ventriloquist talk.
Gotcha.
Oh, sorry. I'm old.
Yeah, I've heard of howdy doody. I just, okay. So yes, you have to howdy doody it. So this is the howdy doody tactic, I guess. Ventriloquist sounds a little bit more formal and intelligent, but it's the same thing.
Family,
it's the same.
It's the same. Slack here.
But no, you need to broadcast your calls so that it seems like the calls are coming from a place that they aren't. And I always say if you're going to do that with your bugle tube, if you're going to bugle, don't bugle straight at the elk. If you bugle straight at an elk from 100 yards away, he's going to know within 6 inches where that sound came from. And if you're going to stay there and not move ahead, 30 yards, he's going to come in to 60, 70 yards where he can see that location, and then he's not going to come any closer. But if you turn around and you broadcast it straight behind you, he might think, okay, that sounded like it was 120 yards back there instead of 80 yards. He's going to come in, but he's coming straight at that sound, which means he's coming straight at you. And that's where you hit that 40 yards. He stood there frontal at 40 yards, and I had no shot. Mm-hmm. So I always like to angle it behind me at like a 45-degree angle, so it pulls him off to the side a little bit and behind me. So as he comes in, he's maybe not coming in straight head on. He might be circling a little bit to the left or to the right, and hopefully giving me a better chance at a broadside shot.
That makes sense.
Does it?
It makes way too much sense.
Okay.
But I need a whole tactic. Riser full of stickers. Okay.
A checklist.
Yeah.
The setup checklist.
Well, those are questions that we've got from a lot of people. Some other ones, as I've summarized them, are, man, I had this elk. He was just really getting with it. But then he shut up. And I'd swear I heard him out there like 70, 80 yards. What should I have done? Should I have called? Did I set up in the wrong place? How many elk? I mean, in my experience, I'm going to answer it but the way it is for me, but a lot of elk, when I do get calling with them, it's like they come in, and all of a sudden,
it's quiet.
And I'm like, where did he go? And I'll get impatient. I get the old ants in the pants problem, and I'll start moving along. All of a sudden, I hear...
He's just standing there watching and waiting.
He was watching me.
Yeah. No, and that's, I mean, it goes back to the elk senses. They're survivalists. Mm-hmm. Every single second, they are aware there's something out there trying to kill them. And they have to be really smart about their actions. And so when an elk's coming into the calls, there are times, no doubt, that a bull will be so enraged, out of his mind in the rut, that he just forgets about that for a little bit. 9 times out of 10, in the peak of the rut, they still don't forget about staying alive. So you get that bull that comes in and he's like, okay, I can't see where the calls are coming from, but they're fairly close. And if I put my head down and go busting through all of this brush, I'm not going to be able to see, I'm not going to be able to hear, and all of a sudden I'm going to pop out right in the lap of whatever's making this noise. And I don't know if there's danger between me and there. I don't know if what's making that noise is danger. And even if it is another bull elk, I go poking my nose out of that brush 20 yards from him. He might be right there ready to rear up and go and come running over there and have a physical advantage and knock me to the ground and stick a tine through my lung. And I don't want that to happen today. So, I mean, they're going to stay back there and realize I can't go any closer and be comfortable. So I'm going to sit here and just be quiet and listen and see, is he sneaking in on me? Is there danger between me and him? If I just sit here and listen for 5 minutes and not make any noise, maybe something will get impatient and come walking towards me, and I'll realize there's danger there. And that's you and me we sit there and it's like, I cannot sit any longer. It's been 31 seconds. I need to go now, and stand up and go busting through that brush. And you get out there and he's running the other direction.
That's the one thing I always try to remind myself, is that an elk doesn't have to be home for dinner. An elk hasn't promised somebody, I'll meet you on this ridge at 11:30. He is just whatever it takes.
Yep.
To
has no schedule.
Yeah, to stay alive. That's how long I'm going to check this out.
Yep.
And I think I fall into this, and I think a lot of hunters do, is we tend to think that elk are as impatient and in as big of a hurry as we are.
Yep. They
are not. They have no reason to be.
And for me, I think that you definitely lose momentum. When you've got a bull, you're vocally engaged there, and you're both calling, and then all of a sudden he goes quiet. And it's like, oh, you need something, it was built up almost to that crescendo, and then all of a sudden it just shuts down, and you're like, I just lost all that momentum. So I need to force something to happen here. And I think that's a mistake. Like you said, patience is key right there. And that elk probably isn't going to turn and come running right in there at any point. There's nothing you're going to be able to do probably to break him loose and turn that back on. But let him turn around and go back 150 yards. Let him turn around and go back to the herd. You re-engage. This time move up, get into a better setup, and hit him again. Mm-hmm. And he's going to call in. You go busting through the brush and bump him out of there, and that hunt's over. So patience is key. Even if it means him turning and leaving and going away, that's okay. He hasn't been alerted to danger. Just let him go, reset, move up, find a better setup, and start it again.
Yeah. And that's, you work so hard to finally have an encounter or have an elk that's bugling back. Don't assume that, the next ridge will have one, and the next basin will have one. It may, but...
Man, not where I hunt.
Yeah. It's like, all right, just take a minute, think this through. And I don't care if you're rifle hunting or you're archery hunting.
Probably even more important, rifle hunting.
Yeah, because...
Those opportunities, I think, are even fewer and farther between.
They certainly aren't broadcasting their location as much in rifle season. And, I tell people that you've worked so hard with your e-scouting, your planning, your hunting while you're out there to find it. To find a bull, and this is your chance, this is your encounter. Give it the thought in the just, I guess, deliberation that it needs.
Yeah. And that was a question I asked this morning. We were talking a lot about aggressive calling and the challenge bugle, and I demonstrated the challenge bugle. I said, how many of you, most of them were less experienced hunters, I said, how many of you are going to go out in 2 weeks, the first elk that comes into you, that you get bugling, when it gets to 100 yards, how many of you are going to be comfortable making the sound I just made? And nobody raised their hand. I said, why is that? And all of them kind of nodded and said, we don't want to mess it up.
Yeah.
And it's like you get that one chance, and I think too many times elk hunters are afraid to mess it up, so they don't do what they need to do. They're too timid, and they wait for an opportunity rather than creating an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so when it comes to calling, I think, for me, it's like, be more aggressive, be smart about it, think about it. But man, when you're set up in the right place and you've got that bull right there in the palm of your hands and you light him up, magic happens.
Yeah.
And if you sit there and wait, sometimes he's like, all right, I've lost interest, momentum's gone, and he turns and leaves. And you miss out on that opportunity that could have been created.
Do you think that's why I have more close encounters the last 2 or 3 days of my hunt than the first 2 or 3?
It could do, certainly could. I think the last 2 or 3 days.
More aggressive.
I was just going to say, it's almost, it's not desperation, but yes, you realize I only have a couple days. I'm going to try this and try to make something happen. There's that, but there's also, you've got 4 days behind you of, okay, the elk weren't here. You kind of narrow down, here's where we're going to focus and hunt because this is where the elk are. And so I think it's a combination of everything there.
Yeah.
But I know I get more, it's not desperate. I get more willing to push harder, more aggressive, willing to be aggressive.
Yeah. Well, I fall into the category you mentioned a lot of the folks who wouldn't raise their hand of like, oh man, I don't know, what if I screw this up? I finally found an elk.
Yeah.
I guess a couple things to that is a lot of people, we get our share of comments of folks saying, why do you guys share all this information? Why, took me 40 years, Grandpa finally told me the secret. So all of you who send those emails, thanks for the reminder that, you think we share too much information. But the other point of that is you still got to go out there and do it.
Oh, man.
And going out there and doing it is where you start getting a bit of this intuitive, instinctive gut feeling of, okay, I know I probably don't want to blow this, but this is the time to be more aggressive.
Yeah.
And that comes with having enough failures.
Look at a pitcher in baseball.
Mm-hmm.
It's bottom of the ninth. You're up by 1 point. The bases are loaded. You've got a guy at the plate. You've got him, 2-2, let's say, on the count. You know that you need to either throw a really hard fastball or you need to throw a really nasty curve to him to get him to swing. And a fastball's taking a chance. A fastball down the middle, it's like he could hit this and hit it.
One.
Yeah. So you're going to take a chance and throw a curveball. But there's also a greater chance on a curveball that it's going to get away from you and you're going to mess up.
Yeah.
But you've got to do what you've got to do you've got to take a risk sometimes. And you've got to step out of your comfort zone and do what might not be the most comfortable thing to do. So, it's kind of the same. It's not like you're throwing a curveball by being aggressive with elk, but at the same time, there's a chance you could mess it up.
Yeah.
But if you really want to succeed, if you want to hit that home run, if you want to strike whatever it is, if you want to come out on top, sometimes you've got to do something that's uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's good advice. Another riser sticker. Be uncomfortable. That's the one I got to remind myself of because I'll admit, and I think this is just this is the inherent nature of accountants, or this is why I became an accountant, is, kind of the world of accounting is first thing, don't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
Do no damage is,
Second thing is if you do something wrong, blame the client, right? Is that?
That's right. You remember when I said that? If someone's going to jail, make sure it's a client.
Yeah.
But I fall into that category of, at times, letting my passiveness or my just concern of how hard, it's been day 3 and finally I got an elk that's working it, and I don't want to mess this up. Yeah. I fully get where those folks are coming from.
Well, it's funny, kind of related but unrelated. I was trying to teach them how to growl when they're making their bugle. Mm-hmm. And you have to get that real deep, frustrated sound in there to get a good growl at the beginning and end of your bugle. And one of the guys was struggling a little with it, so I went to help him out. And I said, what do you do for a living? He said, I'm an accountant. And I said, oh, perfect. I'm like, okay, it's April 14th, 6:30 p.m., and someone calls you and says, I forgot to send you my taxes. I need them done tonight. I have to have them turned in tomorrow. Can you do that? what's going through your mind? He's like, well, I'm not that kind of an accountant. I'm like, well, pretend you are. You know someone who is. You got to, get frustrated there. And,
for that type of accountant, you'd say, all right, I closed the books for the month, and then somebody comes in and says, oh, did I tell you about this loan we took out last month? That needs to be recorded as a liability. So you got to recall the financial statements, and then they would go,
perfect growl.
Yeah. But when we get into these setups, or maybe not, this isn't necessarily a setup question. Some people have asked, is calling going to be as effective in late September and early October when the rut is, it's weird because all the data says the peak conception rates are September 20th through October 5th. But you see some serious rutting activity going on before that.
Yeah.
And some people seem to think that, the rut's over by September 20th. You hear that all the time.
Rut was early this year.
Yeah.
Well, that's funny. The calves are all born on the same date again this year.
Yeah. But a lot of people are asking, can I be as aggressive? Because by then they've heard everything. They're kind of wore down. They're any difference in how you call or how you approach it?
So you have to, understand, I think, the full dynamic of what's going on. The main rut, like you said, the main conception happens September 20th through October 5th. Let's just say there's a 2-week period there. The fall equinox happens right about the same time that the conception begins. That's what triggers the estrus cycle, September 21st, 22nd. So you're going to have, obviously not every cow is going to come into estrus at the same time because they won't all be able to be bred by one bull.
Yeah.
So they're definitely spread out. The older ones come into estrus first, the younger ones a little later, and that gives a bull 7 to 10 days there to find cows, to hang out with them, and to breed the cows. So before that, there's a lot of activity of establishing who the herd bull is, who the dominant bull is, who the breeding bull is going to be. And that's a process all in its own. That's a process outside of the actual conception process there.
Right.
So there's a lot of activity from, say, September 10th through the 20th, establishing, rounding up the herds, getting all the cows together so that the breeding can be effective, establishing which bull is the dominant bull. There might be a great big 900-pound 7x7 over there who's 11 and a half years old, who you think, that is the big daddy I want hanging on my wall. Well, that's not the big daddy that the cows want, helping them have a calf next spring.
Yeah.
It might be this really slick-looking 5.5-year-old 6-point who is just in the prime, and he is the breeding bull.
Yeah.
So, in our mind, what the herd bull is and what the actual breeding herd bull is might be different, but the elk know that. They've established that by the time it gets there. So you've got that process where things are really intense. The 2 weeks leading up to that is when the bulls have split up from their bachelor groups and might not be as vocal, but they're every bit as susceptible to the calls because they are very territorial, they're very irritable. There's a lot going on there. So different stages there leading up to the rut. The pre-rut isn't just one period. There's multiple things that happen in the pre-rut. Even the peak rut, there's things that happen. And then post-rut, there's definitely lingering going on. These young bulls that are like, all right, this testosterone has built up to the point where it's, coming out my eyeballs here. And I got beat up so many times, but I know there's still a cow out there that hasn't been bred. I've got to find her. I'm running around everywhere trying to bugle. So there's going to be opportunities into that first part of October for sure. Breeding is still taking place then. So there's still going to be vocal herd bulls. After that, it definitely tapers off. But then you have to remember there's a 26 to 28 day window there where the cows are going to come back into estrus if they didn't get bred. And there's a percentage, I don't know exactly what percentage, but I would say 15 to 20% of the cows probably don't get bred during that main initial estrus period. So all those cows that don't get bred come back into estrus 3.5 to 4 weeks later. So we're talking on a calendar, October 18th through Halloween.
Yeah.
So there's going to be another window there where there may be a flurry of bulls bugling and fighting to, be able to have the right to breed those handful of cows that are coming back into estrus. So calling can work. And then again, you've got another one 3.5, 4 weeks later for that tiny little fraction of the cows that didn't get bred that might get bred even into November.
Yeah.
So we get, the questions that I saw emailed over. There was one that said, I'm going hunting first week in November. Is it worth even taking calls? Probably not. I would definitely always have a cow call with me to stop an elk if it's going across an opening, get it to stop so you can get a shot with the rifle. Somebody said they're hunting first season in Colorado, which I think is the first week of October.
That's the early season. First this year, I think, is October 14th. But early season in Colorado is like no-brainer.
Yeah. Absolutely. So general season in Idaho opens in most areas either October 10th or 15th.
Ooh.
I would not miss out on an opening day opportunity to get into aggressive calling. Mm-hmm. Again, depending on the area, you go into some areas in Colorado and there's a sea of orange on the hillside. Yeah, that's not the time to get aggressive with calls. But yeah, calls are effective. They're most effective, I would say, in that pre-rut period leading up to the conception. So the 10th through the 20th time phase. That's when calling is going to be most efficient and effective. Calling is going to be most, you're going to hear more calls during the conception period because that's how the bulls and cows communicate. Bulls are displaying their dominance. They are, trying to keep other bulls away, all of that. So you're going to hear a lot more communication then. The problem is they're locked in on cows that are in estrus. So you aren't going to be as effective of calling those herd bulls in at that point.
Yeah.
After that, they're less effective, but absolutely they still work. You can still get responses. You can still call elk in, but for the most part, you're rifle hunting into that period and you don't need to call them into 20 yards. They pipe off once, you should be able to get to an opening and stop them in an opening and get a shot. So if I'm hunting anytime from August 24th through, I might stretch the window a little farther than it needs stretched, but yeah, definitely into the mid to 20th part of October.
Yep.
I'm carrying elk calls and I'm gonna use them.
Yeah. Well, this year Montana's rifle opener, I was just looking at my calendar, is October 22nd. That's as early as it ever is in Montana for a rifle opener. My first bull elk that I shot here was an October 23rd bull elk. And I'd heard a bugle and I thought it was a hunter.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I hear, I look, here comes a cow elk walking by and here comes a bull right behind her. Boom. I guess it wasn't a hunter. And then I'm just thinking about all the other elk that I've heard bugling. My son shot one on October 26th was opening day up in central Montana. I'd been up there scouting for 3 days, and these bulls were just tearing it up. And we went and the night before, we watched them. It's like, boy, that's a great big one. And my brother was here from Minnesota. He's like, there's no way he'll be here in the morning. We walk in the dark, and their bugling walked us right to them.
Yep.
And it's like, you boys might want to quit this because, in about 10 minutes when it's shooting light, it's not going to be a good day for you.
Yeah.
And so he shot that elk. And so I think about the number of elk I've heard bugling. Well, Matthew and I shot 2 of them out of the same herd on Halloween. And there was one young, it looked like a yearling. She was running for her life. And every bull within miles around, the bull to cow ratio there was, we weren't talking per 100 cows. Yeah. We're talking bulls per 1 cow.
Well, when we were hunting in Montana in November with you and the bulls were bugling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was a bachelor group of bulls. Were there, I don't remember, 6, 8 bulls in the group?
Yeah.
And they were bugling.
Yeah.
And bugling hard and aggressive.
Yep. I've had that in Wyoming. Me and Pat were there in November, 10th, I think it was. And there's snow on the ground, and there's a herd of about 200 cows, and there are probably 12, 15 bulls right in this one little segment of the herd, and they're all pointing at her.
Exactly. Well, and it goes back to November 10th. So you go back to September 20th, first conception period.
Yeah.
Add 3.5 weeks to that. You're looking, October 18th-ish, 17th, 18th. So you're going to get a flurry there. Then you go 3.5 weeks forward from there. You're looking November 10th, 12th, somewhere in there. And, we're saying
you mentioned that.
80% of the cows get bred that first time. That leaves 20% the next time. Let's say 80% of them get bred that time. So we're down to only 4 out of 100 cows that haven't been bred in November. And some of them may not get bred. But like you said, every bull that's still wanting to breed. And you have to think about this. Elk are not like humans. Their desire to breed is not the same. For elk, it is, I've got to pass on this posterity that we have to breed to. That's just a natural part of the cycle of life for us.
Right.
And so if there's a cow in estrus in November, that bull says, I've got a job to do. And I need to go there, and there just happens to be 10 other guys lined up there. It creates some chaos for a little bit.
Yeah, it's for that guy, it's probably, like when you're in college and you start making out, and then your roommate comes in and it's like, don't you got something better to do, pal? You're pretty frustrated with that guy. It's like, you want me to just whoop you now and throw you out, or are you going to leave of your own accord here?
Man, I've never put that analogy to it before. But
well,
it's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Corey.
No,
what you get with me. Corey's blushing.
I'm blushing over here. I didn't know where Randy was going with it. And I thought, oh man. But no, it's just there's a limited resource, and there's a big supply chain standing there that. Yeah. So
that answers the question, folks. That calling into late September for sure, even the early half of October is. Yeah. Don't think you're wasting your time.
If I was hunting any time before October 15th, I would be looking for an elk that was bugling. I wouldn't be out there carrying my calls just in case. I would be using my calls to try to find an elk that bugles, because that's such an advantage to locating an elk.
Yeah, if I had a Colorado first rifle tag this year, I think it's October 14th. I'd be there a day or two ahead, and I'd be calling a lot.
Yep.
And if I located where they're hanging out in the dark opening morning, I wouldn't hesitate at all to be making some noise. Now, I wouldn't be out there with a decoy, because yesterday, Corey and I got to talk to Luke and Josh, and they had a Montana decoy outline, stood up, because they'd been out archery hunting. They were fortunately leaned up against a tree, taking a nap, and an arrow comes winging over them.
Yeah. And they said, it's from the other side of the opening. It was a longer shot, but somebody saw the decoy and launched an arrow at it with them set up somewhere not too far away behind it. And that's, first off.
I would never do that in rifle season.
No.
But I've never
heard of anybody shooting. You would think, yes, Montana decoys are very realistic looking, but they're not that realistic looking. And you have to think at some point, a cow elk standing there staring at you, is...
Well, the benefit of if you were doing that on a Colorado rifle hunt, first rifle, you'd have an orange hat and an orange vest. So if they shot you then, it might not have been accidental.
Yeah, exactly.
I always tell people, if I get killed in a hunting accident, it's probably not an accident.
Yep.
It's intentional.
Yep.
But those are those kind of questions, you can almost go to the other end of it, of people asking, how early do you start calling? We posted a clip on our YouTube channel where Jonathan had set up a trail camera here in Montana. And it wasn't a 400-inch bull outside the Bozeman here, but it was a nice 6-point.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be a 400-inch bull next year.
Yeah. It comes walking by the camera, and the date says August 20th. This thing stands there in front of the camera and rips it like it's September 20th.
Yep.
Now, if I would have been out in the woods, here's what my answer would have been like. Some dumb knothead is out here practicing his
scaring all the elk before season.
Yeah. I've not heard that early before, but there it is on camera. You can see him standing there, stomach glunking, and it's like, oh, this is an eye-opener for me. Maybe I'm discounting these noises I hear.
Well, the second they start stripping their velvet and going hard horn, there's a trigger that makes that happen. That's the same trigger that starts the rutting process. Yeah. So we had the same thing last year. We set trail cameras out, I think, on August 15th. No, it was August 13th or 14th. And when we went and checked them in season a month later when we got in there were a pile of bulls, almost all hard-horned by August 16th or 17th. And yeah, they were fighting by the 19th of August, pushing each other around, starting to, and big bulls. This isn't like little raghorns locking up and just sparring. This is bigger bulls pushing each other around, talking, bugling, like you said, glunking, stomach moving up and down, panting, laying down in the water. I mean, it's not the full intense rut that it's going to be a month later, but they're susceptible to communication through calls at that point.
Yeah. And, that's always, for me, this trigger of when we're starting to leave the early season and go to the pre-rut is they rub their velvet. They're no longer in bachelor groups. They're raking trees. They're like, all right, whew, it won't be long now.
Yep.
And to me, that's like, okay, they're starting to forsake the food. And by the end of August, they're completely dispersed. The younger bulls are right in amongst the cows. The older ones are kind of, they're
on the move.
Nearby.
They're moving ridge by ridge. They're still traveling, but they know where the cows are.
Yeah. So the calling earlier in the season, that's where I need to get comfortable with that and quit just checking the box that, another hunter out here.
The problem early is you just don't hear as many bugles. Mm-hmm. They aren't as vocal. It's 73 degrees as soon as the sun comes up. It's earlier. The days are longer. It's getting hotter. So the action just isn't the same. But if you can get an elk to pipe off on August 26th, that elk is easier to call in that day than any other day of the year.
Really? Why is that?
Haven't been pressured yet. There's been no hunting pressure on them. They haven't been educated. They're very irritable. They're very territorial. They don't have cows, so they aren't following cows to a bedding area. They aren't worried about leaving their little bedding area and walking over to you because they aren't leaving cows. You're getting too close into their territory, their staging area, their bedroom, and they're like, I told you yesterday I want nothing to do with you. I'll see you again after the rut, but we are not friends, and you're getting too close here. You know I'm here, and you're still walking this way, running your mouth. I'm going to come and run you off the hill.
Wow.
So I really think a big bull is, and I'm not going to say easier to kill, but more susceptible to killing with calls up until September 8th. After that point, it gets harder and harder.
So walking through that example, because I've heard this, I don't know how many times, it's a September 1st type situation. And you hear a bugle and you're like, well, first of all, was it a hunter?
Yeah.
Or was it an elk? Okay, I think it sounds like an elk.
Because it's not usually a full aggressive bugle. It's just that whistle, high pitch. That it could be a hunter for sure.
Yeah. So in that situation, are you going to try to close the gap and make him more irritable? Or are you going to let him kind of tell you what you're going to do?
It's usually a slower, less, and I'm not going to say less aggressive, a more patient approach to it. Because if you go just guns blazing in there, it might be too much. That bull is he might only have bugled twice that morning, and that's all he's going to talk all day. But now he's there. And at that point, you can probably determine he's by himself. In those staging areas, they hardly ever move. I mean, they're moving 100 yards to go out on an open hillside and feed. Then they're walking right back into that little patch of timber. They're bedding down there. They're getting water from a little spring or something right around the corner. They're locked in that. If he's on that hillside or that bench on August 26th and he makes a noise, he's probably going to be there for a week. And he's not going to move from that hillside. So you can take your time. You can move over there. You can get set up and get really close. And if it was me, I would get in there and I'd cow call a couple times, and then I would sit quietly and listen for 5 or 10 minutes. And then I'd cow call again a couple times. And so often in that early season, you're just going to hear a branch break. You're going to hear something, or you're going to look over to your right, and there's a bull standing there, still with his summer coat on, not a great big mane, but antlers might be a little lighter colored still. But he's going to come in to see what's going on here. I didn't expect cows to come to me. I'm going to go check it out. The other thing is you get in there and cow call, and he fires off a bugle. you hammer him right back, and he's like, pregame, I guess. We're going to go and strengthen my neck muscles here and see which of us is tougher. So I've had some incredible calling, August 27th, 28th, August 30th for sure, because that's opening day in Idaho. And
Really?
we very rarely have had an opening day where we didn't get into really good calling action.
Wow. Okay, I got to adjust my plans then, because at that point, I'm still thinking about walleye fishing. Because I'm like, these are just going to be human bugles I hear if I go out that early. So I usually, in Montana, we always open the Saturday of Labor Day weekend. And I usually let those, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, because the woods are...
Oh, man.
You got non-hunting recreationists and all the hunters. I don't think...
Because everybody has a 3-day weekend. It's vacation.
Yeah.
You couple that with hunting season.
I don't think there's a busier time to be in the woods in Montana. So I avoid that weekend. I'll find... If my wife is going to convince me to fix the washing machine, it's going to be on that weekend.
Wow.
But now hearing you tell all this, Corey, I'm like, well... Maybe I'm just missing the boat here. I guess.
Well, and you have to look at the moon also. And this year we've got a full moon on September 10th, which means the 3rd to the 10th is going to be winding down a little bit from a moon phase perspective. But that also means that August 30th through September 3rd is going to be a good moon phase. It's going to be early. Those bulls are going to be by themselves. They're going to be irritable. I mean, there's definitely a window for opportunity, even for calling during that time.
So you're saying I should give up on pronghorn hunting the last week of August?
If you have a choice to go elk hunting when elk hunting is slow over pronghorn hunting when pronghorn hunting is on fire, always choose elk hunting.
All right. Well... Not words to live by.
You aren't putting that on your limb sticker,
That is not going on my limb sticker.
That's a pot licker's comment.
There you go. Yeah, that's for all the pot lickers. Because normally what we're eating in elk camp is the pronghorn I killed the week or two prior. If I get attacked.
Yeah.
So, but, some of these other setup things, it just, to me, seems, in the reason I'm struggling to bring them all to one question, because we get so many of them, is it seems to be so situational dependent. And what your call setup issues that you're dealing with on a grassland mesa of pinyon juniper in New Mexico or Arizona is 100% different than thick woods of northern Idaho or northwest Montana or whatever.
Yeah.
Are there any general rules about the thickness of the vegetation where if you were given a choice, would you rather call in really thick timber or sparse timber?
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's a great point, and I think it's hard to talk to a certain situation unless you're there, because there's so many variables, the density of the elk herds, the dynamics, the bull to cow ratio, just everything that goes into what contributes to the elk activity and the elk decisions and those things. It's hard to speak to that. As far as calling, though, I don't want to be in the wide open, because that just gives an elk, he can get to 200 yards and see where the calls are coming from. He doesn't have to come any closer, so it's hard to pull elk in the wide open. We hunted the Oregon coast for Roosevelt elk, and I had an elk screaming at me 7 yards away and never even saw him. Couldn't even see movement through the vegetation because it's so thick 7 yards away. So
that's not even this room is bigger than 7 yards across.
No, there were a couple times I started panicking a little bit because I thought if he does come out, he's going to be on top of me. Like, my only shooting lane is 4 yards away here. And so, in that situation, it's tough because you can get right in and there's just so few shooting lanes. So for me, I wouldn't say heavy coverage, but I like heavy timber. Dark timber and north face, maybe more, I don't really want to say open timber, because I don't want to give the impression of, a selectively logged area where there's a few trees. I just like old growth, heavy, dark timber to go into where I've got 40 to 45 yard shooting lanes in 4 or 5 places, frequently.
Yeah. Well, when you were talking about dark timber and north faces and stuff, I just posted the first video of an e-scouting series out on my YouTube channel talking about these bedding areas.
Yeah.
When it's hot, thermoregulation is a huge issue for an elk on September 5th when it's 88 degrees out.
Yep.
So you know which places he's going to go to just by what gives him the thermal cover.
Yeah.
And most people think of thermal cover in terms of, it's not as cold in the winter. Well, when you look at how much nutrition or what the energy cost is for them to stay cool in hot weather, you can, if you're wondering, okay, these elk are moving to somewhere, where are they going to bed? You can cross off every southeast slope, every south slope, every southwest slope, and every west slope.
Yep.
That leaves you maybe northwest, likely north, maybe northeast. So it's...
Yeah, think where the afternoon sun is. The afternoon sun is moving on the western half of the sky.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it's the hottest. That's when the elk are bedded down. They're probably not going to bed on that west side. It's going to be a northeast side. That's going to be the coolest place that doesn't get the most direct sun.
Yeah. And so if you're trying to think of, well, I hear them moving, where are they going? They're going to those kind of places in a place where they've probably bedded 300 times in their lifetime. And they know exactly what the wind and thermal is going to do at that time of day in that bed they're laying in. But that's where they're at. And so you get your chance to go there and try to get them in range. And so
another thing, you bring that up, and it's completely unrelated to calling, but when you shoot an elk, and especially if you make a bad shot, like a gut shot, they get fever. I mean, they get hot, and they are still trying to thermoregulate.
Right.
And so where are they going to go? The coolest place they can find. So it's usually down in a draw where there's water. So if you do shoot an elk and you don't have blood and you're trying to find it, usually you aren't going to find it out on an open south face slope laying there dead. It's usually going to be down in a draw where it's cooler, and understanding that when you shoot an elk and it's wounded, its body's response to that is fever. It heats up, it gets hot, so they're going to look for a cool place to lay down, the same as we do. When we get the flu or a fever or something, we're sitting there sweating. It's like, I need, cold bath, or I'm going to go outside for a minute because I'm too hot. And just understanding those little things and where you're going to find the coolest places helps with bedding. It helps with, tracking, all those different things. Yeah.
And once they go in bed, there's also a little bit of that come into play about where they're going to go feed first in the afternoon. So if you just had, let's say, one little mound, and just for the simplicity of it, they go in bed on the northeast side of that. Well, the west slope by right now in August is completely torched. The south slope is nothing but dirt. The southeast slope, well, yeah, it's got a lot of sun, but it's not the intense hot sun. Well, over on the east side, right where the timber starts to meet you'll usually have the timber grows around the northeast and rolls towards the south. And somewhere on that east slope, there will be an edge. And that east slope edge compared to the west slope edge is going to have way more lush vegetation, because over the course of, let's say, last half of July and August, that eastern side hasn't been getting fried like that edge condition on the west side.
Yep.
So if you're wondering where are they going to go first to feed in the afternoon, they're most likely going to head to that east side or southeast side where it's open and there's some forage on the edge of the timber. The shade is going to hit there first. It's going to be the coolest spot on the mountain, and it's going to be the greenest spot on the mountain.
Yep.
And that's where the cows are going. And if that's where the cows are going, that's
who's following the cows.
Yeah. So, a lot of that stuff, I've sat there many times on a hillside thinking, man, I messed that up. Where are they going to go? And if you really try to think like an elk that doesn't want to waste any energy, doesn't want to put themselves at any risk that's unnecessary, it quickly becomes obvious where they're going to go in the afternoon.
Yep.
And
that's why when I e-scout, the first thing I look for is a north-facing slope, because that, your northeast facing slope is, I throw out numbers all the time, and it's more of a general reference, but 90% of the time, that's where you're going to find elk bedded. Mm-hmm. And when you spin the aspect on your e-scouting around so that you're looking into those northeast slopes, and you look at a pretty big area, there's really only going to be 6 or 8 areas that stand out like, that's bedding area, that's bedding area. So then you look at those, and you quickly realize there's nothing over here where the elk are going to bed. They aren't even going to live over there because they've got feed and water over in this pocket.
Yep.
And so, when you really start to understand how when you really start to understand how the elements that elk need are found on certain aspects, it's really easy to figure out what aspects the elk are going to utilize.
Yeah, and this is where we'll probably get criticized for too much information or making it too easy. But in that video, I show the terrain analysis tool that you and I helped Go Hunt put together. Okay, we know they want to bed. Maximum slope would be 20 degrees, preferably 15 or less.
And how do we know that?
Because Google's your friend, and you go to the Starkey.
I was just going to say, thank you to Starkey.
Yeah, experimental forest and a whole bunch of them. But anyhow, so you do that, and you say, okay, I'm looking for an aspect that faces northeast. Sometimes I'll put east on there just because I'm trying to see where the edges roll around a ridge and where it turns from timber to grass.
Yeah.
Sometimes that rolls all the way to the east. Pretty soon, your map... There's
only a few places that are highlighted green.
Yeah. And so, and when I do e-scouting for these early season pre-rut, peak rut, I'm not looking for the specific spot on the spot. Like, I got to be right here to glass. I'm looking for where is a ridge line or a basin or a bench or whatever that meets these characteristics. Because an elk's doing one of 3 things during its 24-hour cycle. It's feeding, it's bedded, or it's moving back and forth to the other. A cow elk, anyhow. And if I can anticipate where they're going to feed, and I have a pretty good idea where they're going to bed.
And there's a big game trail in between the two.
My odds get a lot better if I put myself where the game's being played.
Yep.
So that's as complicated as I could make that video. But it took me 18 minutes to do that.
There's a lot of detail. No, it's just you start breaking down, and I think that's the thing. There's so many aspects that go into an elk hunt, from e-scouting and scouting, the planning part of it. You've got gear, you've got physical conditioning, you've got the thermals and understanding all of these things that the elk use for their behavior, their feed sources, their needs. We aren't even into locating them or finding them or setting up on them or calling them. There's all these things, and when you drill down into each of these things, the information you've shared on feed sources, and this correlates into that. The northeast to southeast aspect is going to have the better feed in the early season and pre-rut. There's just so many levels of this that the more you peel it down, the less areas that there are that you have to look out in the field for it. So if you really want to drill down, it's going to take some work, but at the same time, you're eliminating a whole big chunk of the landscape where you don't even need to waste your time.
Yeah, and you and I get to hunt a lot, but even you and I try to be as efficient as possible with our time, because who has any fun wasting their time where there aren't any elk?
I may not shoot an elk the first day, but I might pass one up, but I want to make sure that I'm having encounters on those days. And so, it really is efficiency for me is the key.
Yeah.
I want to have multiple experiences. You learn more from that. Mm-hmm. You're able to make mistakes and overcome those mistakes and still be successful. When you get one chance a year and you mess up one little thing, that's it. Yeah. It's hard to be successful with that.
Yeah. And I would ask people, if you're new to this gig, or even if you're not, maybe think about this. I keep notes of what happens each day. And on the days where we have good encounters, whether it's rifle or archery, I try to write down a lot of what were the conditions, where was it at, what was the elevation band. And at the end of a year, I'll go back and look at some of that. And there's a lot of general places of, well, why didn't I spend every day in a spot that has these same similar characteristics? For some reason, I still stray and wander. Boy, that looks like a cool spot over there. I'm going to walk over there.
And I was just going to say that's part of the, I'm going to give this a try and see if it'll work. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot more risk in it. But I've also wandered into some areas that I would have looked because, yes, this is where they want to feed. This is where the best feed is. You got a whole bunch of two-legged predators running around out there, and sometimes they don't get to go for their first choice. So, yes, you have areas that are the highlighted primary areas you want to check out, but don't get stuck in that rut either.
Right.
Make sure that you're understanding elk, they can survive. They will find a way to survive, and you might have to go a little deeper into your backup.
Yeah. So there's so many of those kind of things and bits and pieces that when you get the general question of, well, where should I go? I think this this episode is a good kind of trend. I don't know if you'd call it not transition, but a good progression of how many things go into it. And we're just talking, maybe in the archery seasons, the food patterns of pre-rut and peak rut.
Yeah.
So we never are trying to blow anyone off by not answering their question, but a really vague question is so hard because you got the whole world of possibilities.
Yeah. And the one that we get that, is super, super hard to answer is, I'm hunting Colorado, third week of September. What elevation should I be looking for elk at?
Yeah, we got that so many times.
Yeah, there are elk literally at 0.5 feet elevation on September 20th, all the way up to 11,494 feet elevation, and every single interval in between. Yeah. And maybe not just in Colorado, but elk will find what they need or they'll be at whatever elevation that they can find what they need.
Exactly.
So never box yourself into, your e-scouting shouldn't be, I'm going to hunt elk between 5,000 and 5,600 feet, and I'm just going to walk that band till I find them. You can't do that. You've got to dig a little deeper than elevation.
Yeah, I did the thing at Sitka last weekend. I did a how to find elk on public land, and there's a lot of people at the Sitka Depot. I was surprised. I think they were there for the burgers. But one guy was asking a question. He lives around here, and he's like, okay, so you've convinced me that this is a food pattern. All right, I get it now. Peak rut. I got to look for food because that's where the cows are. Yep. Okay, I hunt in this part of southwest Montana. What food? I'm like, well, and I would answer a little bit in a little bit, and then I quit answering. And you could see the look on his face like, come on, man, tell me. And I'm like, it still is so variable because if you're hunting one of these ranges with a certain soil type, a certain whatever, it might be bunch grasses. But if you're hunting a different soil type, and it's one of those places that's a higher elevation transition range, and it gets some moisture, in August, a little bloom of forbs will come out, and they will move up 800 feet of elevation to go tackle those forbs for 3 days until they eat them all. And I just saw the guy looking at me like, you SOB.
You don't know what you're talking about.
Maybe that's what it was. Maybe it was either you don't know what I'm talking about, which there's a good chance of that, or come on, tell me.
Yeah.
And so I just told him where he could find the information. I said, it's out there on Google.
Yep.
Because most every place that I do all this forage research, I'm trying to think if I've ever researched a hunt where I couldn't find what the preferred forage was at certain times of the year.
Yeah, you look at game and fish organizations, I would venture to say they probably hire more biologists than, obviously enforcement officers and, staff workers and things like that. Biologists are an important part of managing game. And so Fish and Game agencies have biologists that study what fish eat, what fish, how they move, what birds eat, what birds do, what big game, all of these things. That's their job and has been for decades now. So there's a lot of information that's been compiled through those Fish and Game agencies, not to mention universities and scientists and other people who make that their livelihood or their passion. And so there's a lot of information out there that we can relate back to elk hunting, especially on the feed sources and some of those movements.
Yeah, and I'm just going to caution everybody, if they start nerding out like I do, it is going to vary so much. It can vary based on a drought year or a wet year. It can vary based on soil types. It can vary based on elevations.
Exposure to the sun.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's one thing I tell people. Think about when you read the back of a package of seeds and you're getting ready to plant a garden or a flower bed, some will say plant in shade.
Yeah.
Some will say, does well in sun. And the natural forage that these elk are looking for have those same variabilities. There are plants that have adapted to high sun exposure. And elk know when they can take advantage of that and when they can't. And there's some that just are like, no, I got to have some shade.
Yeah.
And
you go on a north-facing slope right now, everything is so lush and green. You look at that and you'd be like, oh, wow, look at all this green feed. Elk don't stay in their bedding areas to eat.
No.
So it must not be as nutritious on those north faces as it is on those fringes, like you said, on the southeast, eastern side. And there's just all these dynamics that play into it. The sun exposure, the shade that they get during the right time of the day, the way that they're able to utilize the nutrients in the soil to create the feed above the soil that the elk are relying on. That's an important part of the nutrition. It's not just green. It's, oh, look how green this is. There's feed everywhere. No, that's not feed. It's green, it's foliage, but it's not the preferred feed source.
Yeah. And as a general rule, know that from a nutritional value standpoint, forbs are always number one for elk. But availability, in June, there were forbs everywhere. Right now, I would challenge somebody to go out and find me enough forbs for an elk that needs to eat 10 pounds a day.
So what are they eating right now, mid-August?
Grasses. Yep. And they will stay on grasses as long as they can. Because in the northern latitudes, when the snow cover covers those grasses, and they have to switch over to browse, that's a starvation diet. Yep. It's just, we're not starving as fast as if we didn't eat anything.
So think about here, when you have a plant growing out of the ground, literally connected to the nutrients with very little geographical separation to the actual food source, there's going to be more nutritional value in it. When you go to browse, those are leaves that are on the end of a branch on a tree. So the nutrition has to go from the bottom of the roots of the tree all the way up that tree, out the branch, onto the limbs, out to the end of it. And it's just not going to be as nutritional.
Right.
It's not going to put as much of that nutrition into the feed source as it does when it's growing straight up out of the ground, which is why forbs and grasses are more nutritional.
Yeah. And so you really get into rifle seasons, late October, November, the elk understand that this is our last chance for grasses because the snow's coming. Yeah, it's dried out grass, but it's still grass.
Yep.
And they are looking any windswept ridge, any place where it was greener and the grass grew taller, so it grows through the snow and gives them an advantage of being able to locate it and maybe paw down to where it is the most nutritional. There's so many things that go into this, and there's so many studies out there that I just encourage people to become a student of elk, I guess is what I'm saying. And hopefully they'll do that. But, well, Corey.
Man, that was some good stuff.
Yeah.
It's very rare that we get done and I think, well, that was educational. But today was one of those days.
Well, you've that's because we let you do most of the talking.
No, that's not.
But we're about ready. By the time this launches, I apologize again, folks, that, we were supposed to have a podcast that dropped 2 weeks ago that was going to be recorded at Park City, Utah. it was going to be a live podcast with RMEF. And a thunderstorm came the night before the podcast, and you're going to be like, well, what does that mean? Well, that chased the band off the playing platform, and they sent them down to the ballroom where Corey's elk calling contest was going on.
Not my calling contest.
So the elk calling contest got cut short 3 hours that night, which we had to pick up the next day. So when we filled that 3 hours into the next day, it ran past when we were going to do the podcast. And they said, well, live podcast or elk calling championship? I don't think they thought about that for very long when they said, we're going to go with the elk calling championship. So, yeah. So that's why we didn't get that one recorded. And then Corey, he bought like the Starship Enterprise, and he decided to drive it through the spine of the Rockies on a family vacation. How did it go?
Well, I was like Lando, driving the Star Wars, and it was. I think I described it as driving a hotel down the freeway.
What year was this Winnebago?
It's a 2008, so it wasn't like, it's not the old tan one with the brown stripe down the side.
So here's the problem with the 2008 Winnebago. Either someone's been using it a lot, which puts it on the verge of wore out and breakdown, or they're like Cousin Eddie, who just lived in it and never drove it. They parked it out right next to the gray water dump there where they can just
pipe right in.
Yeah, and so when it's full, he could yell at Clark. But Cousin Eddie, he just lives in it and he never drives it. So when you buy it then and you take off, the wheel bearings haven't been greased. The fan belts are cracked. There's old gas in the tank.
From that standpoint, we got an absolute gem of a motorhome.
Really?
So we bought it from an elderly single lady.
Oh, come on now. Everybody says they bought their car from a little old grandma.
I bought it from her at her house. Because she was moving into an assisted living. They're having an estate sale.
Oh.
She hadn't driven it for 2 years. When she drove it the previous 6 years before that, her and two of her friends, who were all in their 70s and 80s, all elderly widowed ladies, each had their own motorhome. They would each get behind the wheel of their motorhome, and the three of them would caravan to some place and stay there for a week. The one lady we talked to was 92, and she was getting ready to drive back to Nebraska or somewhere by herself in a motorhome. So from that standpoint, one widow lady in her 70s didn't put a whole lot of miles on it, and when she lived, and she actually was camping in it and staying in it, it's just her. And the refrigerator looked brand new. The microwave looked like it had never been opened. The shower still had sparkle. We replaced the mattress and it looked like a brand new machine. So we got very lucky from that standpoint. From a reliability standpoint, the engine's clean. It was really nice. The problem was gas is at $5.29 a gallon, all the way up to over $6 something in East Glacier a gallon. And doing the math on miles per gallon, about every 8 miles down the road, I'd throw a $5 bill out the window. And you don't think that's too bad until you go 80 miles and realize your wallet's empty of $5 bills and you haven't gone very far. So we didn't even make it from home to Park City, which was the first leg of our trip, before I said, hey, as soon as we get home, we're putting this up for sale.
Oh, wow.
And it was just, as we went, and they'll be great. Someday I'll probably have at least an adventure van or something. But for our family right now, it was a novelty and it was fun. And everything worked out great. But you get to East Glacier and you realize anything over 21 feet is not even allowed in the park. And we've got a little motorhome that's 24 feet, so we had to park it and ride the shuttle everywhere. You get to a nice, bumpy, graveled, rutted out road, and there's some fishing holes 1.5 miles down it, and you realize, well, we can't just drive down there and fish, and we don't have any way other than walking to get down there. And so it just really limits what you can do. And for what we do and where we are in life right now, we're not looking for those limitations yet.
That's why maybe you should have stopped and picked up some llamas from Bo down there.
No, we're not. Yeah, that's what we are picking up llamas. I actually texted Bo the other day, and we have llamas reserved.
No kidding. Well, just don't be taking mine. He's bringing 6 of them to my house tomorrow.
Oh, is he?
No, not, what's today, Saturday?
Yeah.
On Monday.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he's bringing them to you to train for me.
No. We're volunteering for a backcountry wilderness area fence pole. There's a old grazing fence that elk get hung up in. Well, you can't go in there and haul all this stuff out with, an ATV or a truck or something. And so the old boy who's got the grazing lease, he's like, I don't know how you're getting those T-posts out of there. I'm like, well, I'll do it with llamas. And he just about spit his coffee out. He's like, llamas? I'm like, yeah. He's like, I want to see that. So we're going down to the campground tomorrow, Monday night with the llamas. And then we'll go back in on Tuesday. And Bo says that each llama can carry out 14 T-posts easily.
Wow.
Well, they weigh just under 8 pounds apiece. And he's built these little carriers to load them up. So
wow.
I'm going to be shuttling. It's 3 miles each way, so 6 mile round trip. I'm going to be shuttling T-posts out of the wilderness
Loading llamas
area
with T-posts.
with a great big string of llamas.
That is awesome.
Yeah. And being the great guy that Bo is, I'm like, well, I want to pay you for these llamas. He's like, nope. If you and your crew are volunteering their time, I'm volunteering my llamas. So.
Wow.
But
that just speaks to Bo's character, which hopefully anybody listening already knows Bo's character, but he is, he's a gem.
He does have a few llama openings yet for hunting season.
That's what I was surprised, because we just, we decided to do the hunt just this past week, and so I texted him and said, hey, any chance that first week in November you might have 4 llamas? And he said, I sure do. So, yeah.
Well, I told him I didn't need my 4 for the first week in November.
Well, maybe I'm getting yours.
Maybe. Maybe get Mac and Quigley and Pancake, and usually he throws another one in there. I get the rotation of Oliver or Tokyo or McShane or somebody.
Yeah, I've had Tokyo. We had Donnie, which was actually Johnny, but had the ear tag of
that'd
Donnie.
Be a problem with you guys.
It said Donnie on the ear tag. His name, the llama's name was Johnny, but yeah, we had Donnie and Johnny. So.
Speaking of Tokyo, this has nothing to do with elk hunting, but we're coming back from New Mexico, me and Marcus and Dan, and we'd been down there for the early archery elk hunt, and it was so blasted hot. We took the llamas way back in, and there was no water. There wasn't an elk track anywhere. Like, well, I drug these all the way down here for nothing. Well, after the hunt's over, we try to get some miles on the first day, and we stop in Farmington, New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere on some BLM, because we got to let them out and water them and feed them. And Tokyo wanted out, and Marcus slides the back door open on the trailer, and Tokyo runs him
Jumps
over.
in his lap.
And all you hear is Marcus cussing at Tokyo. And I'm like, what's the commotion going on back there? And Marcus is trying not to let go of Tokyo. And Marcus is laying on his back. It's pitch dark. And Tokyo is wanting out and wanting to get away. And he is just stomping the bejeebers on Marcus. He has no idea what's going on. I came back there and I grabbed Tokyo, and Marcus was mad at Tokyo. It's like, Marcus, he wanted out, man. He's in there with all these other old boys, and they're beating on him, and he's got to pee. He wants out of there.
And that's about as much of a rodeo as you're ever going to get out of llamas.
That's the
had it been a horse, it would have been a much different story.
That's the only time we've ever had any issue with llamas, and just pitch dark.
Yeah,
and
something holding onto its neck, pulling it down to the ground. It's like, I got to fight for my life here. And Marcus is down there kicking. It's kicking.
I wish we could have filmed that. That would have been a great blooper. But, well, Corey,
I'm going to go jump on a plane.
Yeah, you should do that.
And head back to where it's hopefully a little cooler.
Yeah, I got to go back to Symposium here and act like I know what I'm talking about. But they've sniffed me out. They know I'm full of it. But thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's good to do one in person together. And
yeah, I look forward to hunting season and catching up. Folks, if we do miss or delay a little bit in hunting season, it's because, well, it's hunting season. We don't live September, October, and November just to do podcasts, with all due respect for the listeners.
But we will give you a full report at some point, probably during season and after season for sure, and share those adventures.
Yeah. So anyhow, thanks for being here, folks.
Yep. And if you don't hear from us before season, good luck out there, and keep us posted on how things go for you.
Do it.